Hi everybody, welcome to a video about intermediate functions. And what I want to do today is I want to talk about a particular kind of way of using functions to make the kinds of programs, the kinds of simulation programs that I've been using as examples, how to make those easier to write and how to make them better. So this is basically, I want to tackle this issue that we often have where we have multiple objects and they all kind of do the same thing, and I want to tackle the functions part of this. So I'm going to start with a simple simulation, which is that we're going to have a user-controlled circle being controlled with the mouse position, and then there are going to be other circles on the screen that are going to be food objects. And so if my user circle overlaps a food object, it disappears because it was eaten. Nom 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 nom. So let's go look at that to begin with, because I have the code kind of pre-baked here. As you can see, we've got a user circle that has a position and a size. It moves with the mouse, so we don't need anything else. And then we've got a couple of food objects here, food 1 and food 2. They have a position and a size as well, but they also, I'm just noticing a mistake there, they also have a property called eaten, and eaten is set to false at the beginning because the food hasn't been eaten yet, but we'll set it true when the food does get eaten, when the user circle touches it, and that's how we're going to track whether or not we should be displaying one of these circles. So it's a trick that gets used constantly in lots of this kind of programming. A Boolean property or variable that's being used to track whether or not something is active. Setup doesn't do a lot, as you can see, and then you can see that my draw function is nicely broken up into different functions that do the different things in the program. There's a single move user, which will move the user with the mouse. There's two check food functions because I have two foods, right? And I need to check both of them. And this is, this is a reasonable kind of idea here. Check food 1 and check food 2. So they're specialized functions for checking whether or not the user has eaten these foods. And similarly, display user and then two display food functions, display food 1 and display food 2. Let's just quickly review what's in these. Move user sets the user's X and Y to the mouse position so that the circle moves. Check food 1 checks, here we start using that new Boolean property. We're not going to bother checking if a food has been eaten if it's already been eaten. So we're actually going to wrap the checking stuff inside an if statement that checks if the food is not eaten. So we've got the exclamation mark in front of food 1 eaten here. So if it hasn't been eaten, only then should we bother to check whether or not it's been eaten on this frame. And then we use the usual kind of structure with circles. We calculate the distance between the user and food 1. And if the distance is less than their two radiuses, then we're going to set this Boolean to true. So food1.eaten is going to be assigned true. From then on, my program knows that food 1 has been eaten. It's the same thing for check food 2. I'm not going to go over that in detail, but you can see that we're doing the same things. It's just that we're doing them with the food 2 variable in this one. Displaying the user is a circle, and same thing with displaying the foods, except again, we're not going to display the food if it's been eaten. So we say if the food is not eaten, then let's display it. Otherwise, it's just not going to appear. And that's what's going to give that effect of the food disappearing when the user eats it. And again, two of these, right? A specialized function for food 1 and for food 2. Let's go look at that. My bad. There we go. So here's my user circle. That was like subliminal messaging. Here's my user circle and two food objects, and I can eat them by overlapping them. Boop, boop. That's the sound it makes. That was me making that sound, not the program. And now they're gone. So I reload. So I can eat the food by touching it. And the program sort of holds together very nicely. So it's a good program, so what's wrong with it? What is wrong with it is maybe best illustrated by attempting to add more food. So let's add another food object. So to do that, we would go up to the top here, and we would almost certainly copy and paste, sorry. So we'll grab food 2, paste it in, and we'll change it to food 3. And it can keep all of these properties here because they're the same, except that I'll move it across to the right a little bit with its x position. Obviously that's not enough because the food at this point is just this variable, so I will also need to go in, and I'm going to need a check food3 and a display food3 function. So I'll take it on faith that I'm going to do that, and I will duplicate these lines here. Oopsie. Like that. So it's going to have to be checked and it's going to have to be displayed, so I'm going to need new functions for those things. And you can see I'm doing quite a lot of copy and paste here. It's probably not a good thing. If you're copying and pasting a function, that's probably not a good thing. So let's change all of the food2s in here to food3, because we're going to have to do that if it's going to check food3 instead of food2. So there we go. Multiple cursors with command click and I think control click in Windows. And same thing for the display, right? We're going to have to copy the template that we have here for 2, and we're going to replace all of the 2s with the 3s so that it deals with the food3 variable, like that. You might be thinking, this is fine, and it is fine, it works. Let's go make sure it works. There it is, 3 foods, right? 1, 2, and 3. Whole program still works, so that's a good thing. It's not a terrible program, right? It's a completely functional program. But look at that, look at those display food functions. They are exactly the same as each other, except that each one deals with a different variable. Food 1 and this one, food 2 and this one, food 3 and this one. And that is not really a good thing, right? An easy way to know that something is a bit wrong is the fact that I was just copying and pasting entire functions and then changing a variable name. That's not a good sign, and there is a much, much better solution to this that we already know. So repetition is our enemy, right? And normally we're solving repetition issues with loops, but we can solve repetition issues with functions, because we can see here that a loop's not really going to help, right? Because the repetition is all over the place. It's up here with these variable declarations, it's down here with these function calls, and it's down here with these repeated functions that just have one small difference, which is the variable. So that's not good. So let's take a look at this. Let's think about displaying food to begin with, okay? So displaying food, you say if the food 1 or food 2 or food 3 is not eaten, because this is all identical, then we will push. We will fill the color of the food, fill, same thing. Then we'll draw an ellipse. This one we're going to draw at food 1, food 1's position and size. This one would be food 2's position and size. This one would be food 3's position and size. So really the idea is draw an ellipse at the food's position, right? That's the more abstract idea here, rather than this very specific idea. So what we kind of mean here is, if the food isn't eaten, push, fill that nice pink color, and draw an ellipse at that food's location. And we've split that idea across 3 functions. But a much better solution to this is to have a single function that can do this job for any of the foods. How would we do that? It would be called display food, right? And we could, again, well, let's, so if the food, let's say food is not eaten, sorry, if not food.eaten, we would push just like always, we would fill just like always, and we would draw an ellipse at the food's position and the food size, and then we would pop, right? That's what we want to do, and we just want it to be the case that this food could be any of the foods, and the way that we would do that is that we would pass it in as a parameter. So we can give a function information about how to do its job by giving it a parameter. Then when it gets called, we pass through the argument the information that it needs. So we could give this display food function an argument that specifies which food. Instead of having a specific function that only works for one food, we could have a single function, display food, that takes a food as a parameter and does the same job with that. To make that work, we also, of course, can't call these functions, which we've now deleted, so that this is a broken program. We want to call display food, but we need to give it which food to display. So the first one should display food 1, second one should display food 2, third one should display food 3. So we've still got these three function calls, but now it's the same function each time. And that's generally a good sign if you're using one function more than once, because it's reuse, right? Down here we only have one function definition for displaying food. We only need one because we used a parameter. Let's go make sure that the program still works. And there we go, same thing, right? Boop, boop, same thing. So the food's displayed just as well with one function as three, and we've saved a bunch of code. And we can do exactly the same thing for these check foods, right? We can do the same idea. So function check food, we would pass it a food parameter, and I'm just going to copy and paste here. It will save me a little bit of time, because this is the sort of the template of what I want to do, right? It's just that I don't want to do it with food 1, or not only food 1. I want to do it for the food parameter that has been passed into this function. So if the food hasn't been eaten, calculate the distance between the user and the food that this function is dealing with. And if that distance is small enough, then set that food's eaten property to true. And again, if we pass through each of the foods in turn, food 1, food 2, food 3, then this food is going to be food 1. All of this stuff will be done to food 1. The next time through, this will be food 2. All of this stuff will be done to food 2. And then the same for food 3. So we need to make this change up here again, right? Check food, food 1, food 2, and food 3. And the program still works, thank goodness. That would have been embarrassing if it had not. Okay, so we've made our program extremely, extremely better. Instead of 3 functions for checking and 3 functions for displaying, we have 1 function for each. So we've sort of technically saved 4 functions worth of code, but it's not just about the length of the program, right? Previously, when, for example, I don't know, display food was 3 functions instead of 1, if I'd wanted to change the color of a food, I would have had to have changed it in each of the 3 functions, which leaves a lot of room to make mistakes. Here, if I want to change the color of a food, I just change it there. Now they're purple. Wonderful. I actually prefer them to be pink. So there's a huge win here as well in terms of not making mistakes in your code that you get from kind of reducing down and abstracting, if you like, the nature of the code. Okay, so there is another kind of repetition in this program that I want to talk about. It might become more evident if we add a 4th food. So let's add a 4th food. So I'm going to copy this and paste it. It's going to be food 4. It's going to be 100 pixels to the right. So we've made a new food object, and then clearly I need to call these functions again. So food 4 and food 4 here. So that was a lot easier, right? Because check food and display food can just take on food 4. So now there's 4 of them. Doot, 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 doot. Wonderful. So it still works. We added a food with very little difficulty, but there is still repetition there because I was copying and pasting still. I did it in 2 places. The copying and pasting that I did here to create check food and display food for food 4, I can't do anything about that right now, but I will be able to. But the other piece of repetition is up here. I duplicated food 3 to make food 4. And you can really see how repetitive the top of the program is looking now, right? Each of these food objects is really similar. In fact, they're all identical except for their X position, which is different. And what would be much better is if I had a function that created foods for me that could take on the parameters that I want to specify. Maybe I could create foods at a specific position, an X and a Y, and it would create that food object, and then it could return it, and I could use that. So let's implement that function. So if I wanted a function that creates food, I'll call it create food. What information would it need? Well, I'm going to say that I'll give it a position. So X and Y. I happen to, the way that I've been doing these foods, I don't change the Y position. But if you're going to specify the X, you may as well specify the Y as well. So that's going to create a food. And how do you create a food? Well, just in the same way that we were doing up here. Let me use food 4 as my template. So I create food 4 by specifying its X is 550, its Y is 300, size is 50, and eaten is false. So rather than creating something called food 4, I'm just going to create a variable called food. Rather than always positioning it at 550, I will use the X parameter that came in, whatever was specified when this function gets called, and the Y parameter for the Y as well. So we create a food at x and y, 50 and false. For this to be complete, though, I need to give the food back. So I say return food. So this is now a function that when I call it, it goes away and it creates a food at the position specified and returns it. Now, I need to use it, of course. I can't use it up here at the top. Instead, the right place to use something like this is in setup. So what I need instead of these 4 big declarations of objects is I just need the variables. So I'm going to have food 1, food 2, food 3, and food 4, like that. Maybe I'll delete these lines up here, and maybe I'll say foods, because that's the plural of food, right? So now, to put my objects into these variables, to assign them, I'm going to say food 1 is assigned what? Well, I'm going to call the create food function to create the food. And I've forgotten where I was drawing these. I'm just going to take a guess. 250, 300, let's say. That's not correct. Let's put them at window height over 2. So this one's going to be at 250, window height over 2. It's going to be created inside this function down here, which is going to make a new food object, and then it's going to return it. So this is going to make a new food object at 250 and the window width divided by 2 for the y, size of 50 and an eaten of false. And that will create it, and then it will end up in my food 1 variable. And I can do the same for food 1, food 2, food 3, and food 4. I just need to, again, you can see there's this repetition going on here, right? This one's 2, this one's 3, this one's 4. This one can be at 350, 450, and 550. So this is still, there's repetition going on, there's still copying and pasting, but as I said, I'll solve that a little bit later on. But now our program should work again. Doop, doop, doop. Wonderful. Boop, 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 boop. That's the sound of eating in Circle World. Now to add another circle, it's a little bit better again because I just need to declare, let's say 2 new food variables. I need to create them, 5, 5, and 6, and give them new positions. And I need to call the functions on them. 1, 2, 3, do, do, do. Hey presto, display them. And now I've got 6 foods in my program. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's pretty good. I don't want to toot my own horn because it's not my horn, it's JavaScript's horn. But that's pretty great. This is a very good use of functions. We've now got a function that creates food, so we don't have to repeat the object declarations up at the top of the program. We have got also functions that display food. Any of the foods, as many as you have, you can display it with display food and give it the food object. And we've got a function that checks food. And that has made our program very, very efficient. We now have a program that previously, when we began this video, would have required 6 object definitions, 6 check food functions, and 6 display food functions. And we have now reduced that to a very efficient program, a shorter program admittedly, but most importantly, a clearer program, and a program that we are much less likely to make mistakes in. So that's the huge benefit that's going on here. Oh, nice freeze frame. And I hope that you can see that that is a huge win for us. It's not just about organization at this point and like giving things names and separating code out. It's about using parameters and return values to make your programming sort of much more cohesive, and importantly to make your functions reusable as well as modular, so that you can use them again and again and get some real value out of those functions. Okay? So I will see you in the next video. That was intermediate functions. Goodbye for now.